Hello everybody, and welcome to the retail part of my photographic career, I guess you can say. It follows on from my 2 or 3 years with Real Photo Finishers, a job which I really did enjoy. I was given the opportunity to go down to Kodak and have some training and see all their production facilities. But the nature of working in a developing and printing laboratory, it's very, very repetitive. And because I'm basically a people person, I really wanted to get involved in other aspects of photography. Now, my local camera shop, not technically a camera shop, it was a high-class chemist or pharmacy or drugstore for those of you out in the States. That was Ashfield's Chemists on the high street in Rhyl. And back in the 70s, Rhyl was a very vibrant seaside holiday resort. Sadly, those days are long gone. But nevertheless, back in the day, there's a photograph here of Rhyl High Street, which is where Ashfield's Chemist used to be. I think it's on the right-hand side of this image, and this is taken, I think, from 1980s or 1990s, when the high street had been pedestrianised. In the 70s, it was a two-way thoroughfare, very, very busy. Ashfield's Chemist was a double-fronted shop. The left-hand window was devoted to perfumes and the like, hair shampoos and all that sort of stuff. And the right-hand side was the photographic side. And it was a long shop. The left-hand side of the shop was devoted to the cosmetics counters. The right-hand side was photographic, and then down towards the back was the counter in front of the dispensary, where all the medicinal products were on display. And the guy behind the photographic counter was a guy called Chris Wilde. Chris was a very competent photographer, and he let slip one day that he was leaving to start his own photography business. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I could possibly get his job, kind of thing. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with the owner of the business. That was Neville Roberts, Nev, who was the pharmacist. And he agreed to give me, a week's trial. So I spent a week working alongside Chris Wilde, and boy, oh boy, that was a real eye-opener. It's partly why I've put this image of all the cameras on screen for you to have a look at. Photographic retail back in those days, pre-digital, was completely, and I mean completely different to how it is now. Especially when you bear in mind that I was working in a holiday resort, and the number of people that would come and ask to have a film loaded in their camera, not just to buy it, but to actually buy it and then for me to load it, was a real eye-opener for me. And that was the first time, really, when I began to appreciate the variety of film formats. Before I started working in retail, obviously I was aware of 35mm film, 120 roll film, and that really was about it, to be honest with you. They were and maybe 126 Instamatic cartridges. That's fine, that's understood. But once you get behind a counter and you get holiday makers coming in and saying, can you please put a film in this for me? That's when you realise the variety of different film formats. 35mm, yes. 120, yes. 620, same size film, different spooling. 127, of course. 828, anybody remember 828? Which was basically non-perforated 35mm film, sold really in conjunction with the Kodak Bantam series of cameras. So that was a tiny roll film using unperforated 35mm film. And then you had Agfa Rapid, which was a really good system. That was 35mm film, but it ran from one cassette into another cassette. So there was never any rewinding involved. All you had to make sure of was that you had an empty Agfa Rapid cassette in the camera to accept the new film as it wound through. The good thing about that is that it was only ever used by Agfa cameras, like the Agfa Rapid in the photo here. That was a great system. Then, of course, you've got your more or less ubiquitous Kodak 126, latterly 110 cartridge films. The disc system hadn't come out in those days. You had half-frame cameras, and of course you had the Polaroid line of cameras, going from the black and white Swinger through to the Color Pack 80, at least that's what it was called in this country. So there was all those different types of film, and you had to become familiar with actually how to load cameras for people. Cameras like the Exacta, of course, which is back to front compared to other 35mm cameras. And you come across all sorts of oddball cameras along the way. And it's interesting to bear in mind that in the 1970s, when I started working in retail, none of the major manufacturers had their own United Kingdom distribution network. To give you an idea, Canon, for example, Canon cameras were distributed wholesaled by a company called J.J. Silber. Olympus, really pretty small outfit back in the day, and they were distributed by a wholesaler called David Williams. And of course, Olympus back in the day, one of their best ever cameras, and it is still a fantastic film camera today, is the Olympus Trip 35. If you haven't seen one, don't know about it, I suggest you look into it. Absolutely brilliant little camera. Nikon cameras, for example. Nikon, they were distributed by the Rank organization, amongst others. Minolta, they were distributed by a company in Staffordshire called Photopia. And Photopia also distributed other camera manufacturers like Edixa. Anybody remember Edixa? Leica, for example, at least for a while, was distributed by Gratispool, which were more well known for offering free film and free film developing and printing. But yeah, for a time, Leica was distributed by Gratispool, and they also had the rights to distribute Durst equipment to begin with, the Durst line of enlargers and things. Then you've got one of the best distributors that I ever experienced working with was a company called Technical and Optical Equipment, TOE, and they distributed Zenith cameras, and they were absolutely brilliant. And the likes of Mamiya, Certainly for some time they were distributed by Hanimex. Hanimex, parent company at least, was Australian, but yeah, they distributed Mamiya cameras. So there's a whole shift because, and all this came about because in 1962, or rather up until 1962, the British government put very strict restrictions on the import of Japanese cameras. So that's why there was no network of manufacturer companies in the UK. It was really difficult to bring Japanese cameras in. So that's why these other wholesale companies filled the gap, if you like. So following on from 1962, that's when things began to change. And that's when it became feasible and financially viable for wholesalers like this to actually distribute cameras. And then, of course, leaving aside you have to learn to appreciate what films go in what camera, how to load various cameras, and then on top of that you've got all the ancillary bits and pieces, because back in the days of these film cameras, a lot of people were still using bulb flash units, and you've got different types of flash bulb. You've got your AG type and the PF type. You've got, for certain professionals, they were still using the very big FP focal plane type bulbs, which had a long burn time, the big blue things. And I'll tell you one thing, you never ever get hold of one of those flash bulbs straight after it's been fired. They are so hot, they would melt the skin on your fingers. You always had to let them cool down, and that's why a lot of these old bulb flash guns have got an ejector button on the back, which mechanically just pushes the spent bulb out the front. Then of course you've got people like Kodak with their Instamatic cameras. They started to use magic cubes and flash cubes. Flash cubes are the ones which require a battery in the camera to actually fire them, and then they were replaced later on by magic cubes which don't require a battery, and it's a case of recognizing what type of flash cube goes on what camera, all these sort of things. Then you've got the batteries, what sort of battery goes in what type of camera, and there was an awful lot, a heck of a range. And then you've got things like filters. A lot of people coming in back in the day would still be using cameras, bellows cameras of all types, like Zeiss, Icontas, and the like, without a threaded filter mount around the lens. So they would require push-on filters. And that was another thing that I had to sort of pick up on. And then of course you would quite quickly begin to understand what the majority of cameras took when it came to a filter for their standard lenses. The likes of Pentax, for example, the Spotmatics, nearly all 49mm screw. Nikon and Canon, nearly all 52mm. And all these things you have to learn and pick up as time goes by, partly to keep the customers happy and partly to make sure you've got stocks of stuff that you need. In the summer months, we would stock up with loads and loads of film, let it deplete over the winter months, and then start again the following year. So that was my time at Ashfield's Chemists. And then after, I think, 2 or 3 years, Nev got an offer. He couldn't refuse to sell the business, but because the photographic side was doing so well, he opened a standalone photographic shop just around the corner, and I ran that for a couple of years. So that became Ashfield's Photographic as opposed to Ashfield's Chemists. And again, it was great to work in that environment. There was just me there behind the counter, nobody else, very small shop unit. And it wasn't long before I realised that I needed more. I didn't really like being on my own in the shop, and I heard through the grapevine that Chester Camera Centre were looking for a manager. So I popped along to Chester Camera Centre, had an interview with Ken Merritt and Gordon Stent, and they appointed me as manager of their Chester store. And that was in the late 70s, I think. Yes, it would have been mid to late 70s anyway. And that's when Chester Camera Centre was part of a buying consortium called Photo Markets, and it was simply a group of independent retailers that came together in order to buy cameras and photographic equipment in large quantities to get better discount. It's long gone, but that was the idea behind it. So Chester Camera Centre became Photo Markets Chester, and I was manager there, and I had 4 or 5 staff, big shop. That's when I had the embarrassment of nearly arresting the Duke of Westminster. There is a separate video of mine somewhere on the channel. If I can find it, I'll put a link to it. That was really very embarrassing. And it was also the occasion when the 2 bosses, Gordon and Ken, decided to open another shop in Manchester. I was given the job of being there, stocking shelves the day before it opened. And so I was there with jeans and t-shirt on, and towards the end of the day I get a phone call from Ken and Gordon to say that their car had broken down on the M56, and I would have to stay back and entertain the ladies. And I said, okay, what ladies are these? And unbeknown to me, they had arranged through Mecca, the people that organised the beauty contests back in the day, they'd organised for Miss UK and Miss World to be at the opening of the shop the next day as models for photographers. And they had arranged to put the ladies up in the Piccadilly Hotel, which was above the shop, and that they had arranged to meet them for dinner. But because they were going to be late until they got their car fixed or towed, they needed me to entertain Miss UK and Miss World, and that was another embarrassing episode. Now, after I finished working at Chester Camera Centre, I had a few years away because that coincided with marriage, children, needing to get a wage and find work in whatever capacity I could. But then in the 1980s, I was approached by a company in the northwest of England. I'm not going to name them because this didn't end well. At the time, they were the cheapest mail order company in the country. End of, period. That was the boss's sole intention. He would spend hours scanning through magazine advertisements just to make sure that his prices, our prices, were lower than anybody else's. The problem was that the attitude was okay, but the way that he went about running the business was far from okay, because his girlfriend stroke common law wife was in charge of the mail order side, and everything in those days was done by telephone. Internet was not really a thing. And at the end of the day, if he was financially stretched, he would simply make a call downstairs to the mail order department and say to his girlfriend, okay, I need £5,000 in the bank today. and put the phone down. So that meant that by the end of the day, he would have to have £5,000 in order to pay into the bank, either to cover overdraft or to pay suppliers, one or the other, or both even. And to do that, his girlfriend would, let's say, for example, I phoned them up, I was scanning their advertisement, and I decided that I wanted, I don't know, 20 rolls of Fujichrome slide film. 20 rolls, okay. And let's say, for example, that would have been 100 quid, just as a round figure. Well, I'm afraid that what would quite often happen would be that her finger would slip, and instead of it being £100 debited to your account, your bank account, she would add a zero to it. So instead of you being debited £100, she would debit you £1,000. And you would be absolutely amazed at the number of people that actually didn't check credit card statements or bank statements. And they got away with a number of fraudulent transactions like that. Until, sadly, I left. I couldn't stand it anymore because the complaints kept rolling in and rolling in. And although I wasn't getting every phone call that came in, nevertheless, the complaints began to escalate. I left, and on the day that I left, I phoned the fraud squad, and the police investigated. As I say, I'm not going to name them, but they had several retail outlets across the northwest of England, and now, of course, all gone. So there we are. That's a brief, short look at the retail side of my photographic experience. It's everything has changed. I'm not saying that, of course, nowadays anybody working in photographic retail has it any easier, but completely different. Whereas you have got a variety of cameras, and obviously a tremendous amount of lenses and accessories. Yes, you've still got your tripods. Yes, you've still got your hold-alls. Yes, you've got your filters and all the rest of it. And yes, you've got batteries, but they tend to be batteries now that are dedicated to a particular camera brand or camera type. Not like it was in the 70s when you had a real mix of batteries for all sorts of different camera types. What they don't have to deal with is this kind of plethora of different cameras, unloading film, unloading film, working out if the camera is working correctly or not, which in the days of these cameras you could do simply by firing them dry and test firing them, if you like. You can't really do that now with modern cameras. Incidentally, one of the worst cameras I've ever seen in my life is pictured here. Can you guess which one it might be? It's actually the Nicorex Zoom 35. Oh my goodness, that was a terrible, terrible camera. And if Nikon had kept going with that particular type, I hate to think where they would have ended up. That's early 1960s, doesn't have a pentaprism viewfinder, it has a poro prism, which is sort of mirror-based, and it was really very dark and dim. It had a fixed zoom lens. I think it's 43 to 86, something like that. I'll correct myself down here if I'm wrong. Just an awful, awful camera. But I do believe that the lens, they later made that interchangeable lens available for the Nikomat and other f-mount cameras, of course. But that really was an awful, awful camera. Sorry, Nikon, and any Nikon lovers out there. Anyway, there we are. That's enough waffling. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of a look back at the times gone by. and I hope that you enjoy your photography, whether you are in retail or not. Stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye for now.